everyone, my name is Christina Keeney, and I decided to do my presentation on what it is like for families to care for dying family members. I chose to do this topic because it hits close to home, as in, I have some experience and I know a lot of extended family that has done to do this. Um, as I am sure you can imagine, or if you have experienced it, it is very hard to take care of a dying family member. Some questions that people have that have never experienced it before are: how hard is it really to take care of someone you love? What are actually the pressures that it puts on the family or partner that is doing so? And what can make it more bearable? In the next few slides, I will answer these questions with some real life examples my family and I have experienced. Example number one. Back in 2005, my grandfather fell in his apartment and broke his hip. After being discharged from the hospital, my grandma, dad, and two aunts decided it was best for them to no longer live in the apartment on the third floor and to live with one of their children. So off they went to live with my aunt. Now, fast forward to 2007, is when things kind of took a turn for the worst. He needed to get his leg amputated, which was my aunt's first decision she had to make as his care provider. I asked her what it was like to make that type of decision. She said it was hard because the decision was not only going to affect her and my grandfather, but it was also going to affect her mother, her brother, her sister, and his grandchildren. My aunt did say um, that also another hard decision that she had to make was whether or not to put him in hospice and when the right timing was. Because when he did get put into hospice, he actually ended up living for 9 months, and typically the average is 2 weeks. So then she was second guessing herself on, should I even put him in it? Was it the right time? Should I have tried harder? But with all that being said, my aunt did say that up until he passed away in November of 2008, she was so lucky to have the support of her husband to bring her parents in and take care of them. My uncle always told my aunt that he'd rather have my grandfather pass away around family rather than strangers. The support of her siblings were great as well. Now, my family would come out every weekend to spend time with my grandfather and the family just to be together, and also every Friday on my dad's long lunch break, he would sit with my grandfather. My aunt said she wouldn't have known what she would do without the constant support from her husband and siblings. Um, as to what could make it more bearable, even though he did pass away at 91 and lived a great long life, um, she wishes her father wouldn't have to go in that pain. But other than that, she would not change anything, any decision she made, or anything that happened. She would do it all over again the same way. Now, my aunt was lucky that my grandfather was still with it to make any decisions that they needed to make together in the beginning. Once it got to the end and he wasn't really communicating is when the decisions got harder. The only sign that we really got from him was facial expressions, like smiles, winks, sighs. We really, the only emotion we got was pain from him. Whenever he was in pain, he would wince. At that point, should there be active euthanasia or passive to put him out of his misery, being that he is a 91-year-old bedridden with one leg and can't communicate? I think when it gets to a certain point in a person's life, and with their health and quality of life, active euthanasia to put someone out of their misery, or passive euthanasia to do something that is to stop doing something that is keeping them alive, then eventually it would let them to die, is okay if the patient agrees. But if the patient cannot agree, as long as the family's okay with it, I think it's okay. Now, example number 2. So my second example is my uncle who was diagnosed with ALS, or otherwise known as Lou Gehrig's disease. He got diagnosed in March of 2021 after going to the doctor for what he thought was a pinched nerve. After the diagnosis, my uncle was honestly never the same person again. With ALS, it's kind of just a waiting game, and you're kind of just waiting to die. You slowly lose all control and strength of your muscles. Even with your body deteriorating on you, your mind is still alive and well. And that's just no way to live. It's pretty depressing and you become miserable. But on the flip side, I've never seen a family rally around one person as much as they did my uncle. Between constant visits, building ramps for him to get around in his wheelchair or to walk more easily, the whole family and community came together. Another thing with ALS, it can be really quick or it can be a long diagnosis, like over 10 years before you pass away. It's just a waiting game. A few months later, after the original diagnosis, my uncle ended up getting COVID. Because the ALS progressed so much, he couldn't cough or blow out any of the mucus, which then led to pneumonia, and then he had to be intubated. Once he was intubated, he was never going to get off. My uncle did not want to live like this, which caused him to be miserable, which was hard on the caretaker, which was my aunt, and 2 sons. So the 4 of them had come to a decision. And because they knew that their father didn't want to live like that, and they didn't want their last memory of their dad to be like that, and they didn't want him to they didn't want him to go through with it, they decided to take him off intubation, and a few days later, he passed away. Now, there was a few choices I think that could have been made. The first choice that they did make was deciding for my uncle to no longer be intubated is a form of passive euthanasia. Being intubated is what was keeping him alive, and not being intubated anymore would now allow him to die and be at peace. Yes, they did do a form of euthanasia, but I think when someone has an illness like ALS where there is no cure and you know you are going to die, especially when the disease is so rapid like my uncle's was, what is the harm of a physician assisted suicide? I feel like when someone is diagnosed with a horrible disease with no cure like ALS, the patient should be able to have that choice. They are putting themselves out of misery, and they're also thinking of their family, that their family doesn't have to be scarred for life and watch someone they love die and they can't do anything about it. So I feel like if there's no other choice and they know they're going to die and they don't want to live like this, they should be able to have the choice of an assisted suicide. Now, example number 3. My final example is my grandmother. In 2015, my grandmother was diagnosed with dementia. Now, like my grandfather, my aunt wanted to take care of her for the rest of her life. She again had the support of her husband in full force. But in 2017 is where the dementia got worse, to the point where my grandmother would start to wander at all hours of the day and night. She also knew how to unlock doors and open them and go walk outside at all hours of the night. It got to the point where we needed to get a baby monitor like camera in her room to monitor when she was sleeping. Now, you would think that would have some type of peace of mind, but instead, my aunt was still up at all hours of the night watching the camera to make sure my grandmother wasn't wandering, running away, or falling down the stairs. Um, Now, it comes to a point where the caregiver, as a caregiver, you also need to take care of yourself. My aunt was getting sick. She wasn't taking care of herself. And as she says, in order for you to take care of somebody else, you need to take care of yourself as well. Now, as much as my aunt didn't want to do it, my other aunt and my dad had to to step up and make the decision that it was unfortunately time to put my grandmother in a nursing home. As much as it killed all of us to do it, it was the right decision for all parties. It was for the health and wellness and safety of my grandmother and the health and wellness of my aunt. In September of 2018, she was placed in a nursing home, and in April of 2023, she passed away at the age of 98. She lived a long, successful life. Now, one of the saddest things with my grandma when it came to dementia is that she knew she had it, and whenever she forgot every little thing, she would be nothing but upset with herself. And to watch a person you love go through dementia, know that they have it, and get so upset about it was something so heartbreaking, I wouldn't wish it on anyone. Now, um, some examples of euthanization when it comes to dementia would be active and passive. Would be doing something that causes someone to die, like mercy killing, or to keep something from them that was originally keeping them alive and taking it away, which would allow them to die. Would, in my opinion, be the ethical way to do it. Now, I know with my example of my uncle, I said if a disease does not have a cure and the patient is suffering, they should be able to pick the physician assisted suicide. Now, the difference between ALS and dementia, well, the similarity between them is there's both no cure. But the difference between them is ALS, you still can give consent because your mind is still there. With dementia, you're gone. Your mind's completely done and you cannot give proper consent. Therefore, I do not believe that the physician assisted suicide is an option because the patient cannot give consent to it, and I don't think it's right for an assisted suicide to be consent by the family, such as non-voluntary euthanasia, where the patient is in no right state of mind to choose to die or not, and it hasn't been discussed before. And then involuntary euthanasia is basically just killing someone without asking or any consent. Now, here are my sources is the textbook for the definitions, and then all of my research was personal research between my aunt taking care of my grandmother and grandfather, and my other aunt taking care of her husband with ALS. Okay, that's it. Thank you.